How many of you have heard of a guy named Brad Pitt? A few of you? Okay. So I ran across this article this week about him, and it just kind of caught my attention. So I'll just read to you. It says, Brad Pitt is known for being one of the biggest Hollywood stars alive today, and for many years. He was also an atheist. However, recent struggles of his that include addiction and a painful divorce from Angelina Jolie have led to him finding God. For years, Pitt pushed all questions of faith aside in favor of life's many worldly distractions. It was only during his divorce from Jolie that he started to change and value the real blessings of life, including his children. I got to be more for them, Brad said amidst his divorce. I have to show them, and I haven't been great at it. Pitt remembers sleeping on a friend's floor for weeks following his divorce because he was simply too sad to stay in the family's home all alone. These kinds of struggles are what softened his heart and allowed him to find God. Pitt did not have a good experience with faith growing up, and though he was raised in a Christian home, he says it was more of a cleaner, stricter version of Christianity. Back then, he saw faith as a list of rules rather than a personal relationship with Christ. I never understood growing up with Christianity, don't do this, don't do that. It's all about don'ts, he explained. Once he grew up, Pitt ditched Christianity altogether. I completely left it, and I called myself agnostic, he said. Tried a few spiritual things, but didn't feel right. Though he was soon calling himself an atheist, Pitt said this was more about conforming to the standards of the world versus truly denying God in his heart. Then I called myself an atheist for a while, just kind of being rebellious. I wasn't really, he said, but I kind of labeled myself that for a while. It felt punk rock enough. After what he's been through recently, however, Pitt has found God again. So I actually found that article on upliftingtoday.com, but then I Googled it, and there's a bunch of different places that have carried similar kinds of articles about him. Now, I'm not sure exactly how he has found God. And what I want to focus in on today is that disappointment that he felt with Christianity as he experienced it growing up. I wish that Brad Pitt was all alone there, that he was the only person to ever live that experienced Christianity as just a bunch of rules and rituals and things like that. But we all know that's not true. Probably all of us have people we know that have said, I don't want anything to do with Christianity. I've actually talked to people who said, I don't dare set foot in a church because I think lightning would strike me if I walked through the door. Their idea of church is just that sense of fear of what God might do to them because they have broken some or many of his rules. That is so, so sad. So in the next 3 weeks, I want to talk about how religion misses the heart of God. We're going to talk about that today. Then next week, we're going to talk about how religion is fear-driven and God is not fear-driven. And then on the third Sunday, we're going to talk about how religious people can be extremely cruel, but God is not. So that's going to be our journey over the next 3 weeks. So we're going to contrast what true followers of Jesus are like, or what Jesus was like, versus what religion is like. So religion is focused on outward behaviors, typically. it's typically focused on rules and rituals. So the classic religious question is it right to do blank? I get this question all the time. Is it okay for a Christian to do this or that or the other thing? And that's classic religious thinking. It's focused on making things right or wrong, black or white. So religious thinking is focused on where does the line go between what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And religious people desire to have a very clear-cut, absolute, this is black, this is white kind of separation. That is classic religious thinking. And it feels secure. Let's face it, if we know exactly where the line goes, we feel more secure that we are where we stand with God. How many of you have ever been on a construction site where they were building a deck? Okay, a few of you. So I have been. Now, how many of you have gone out on the deck before the railing was there? And how many of you, when you went out on the deck without the railing, walked right up to the edge of the deck and felt totally secure? Yeah, a few of you that don't have any fear of heights. But I'll be honest with you, the higher the deck, the further back from the edge I stand if there's no railing. But if there is a railing, then I can walk right up to it, even if it's on the 14th floor. Doesn't bother me. But I'll tell you one thing, if I'm on the 14th floor and there's no railing there, I am not walking right up to it. I'm just not that kind of person. We feel secure when we know exactly where the line goes. And that's what religion does for people. It gives you a clear sense of where the line goes, and so you feel more secure. And this is one of the reasons why so many people crave religion, because we want to know that sense of security. But unfortunately, it's actually an artificial sense of security. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Because it's not necessarily a reflection from God. So I want to look at a story this morning to kind of set the parameters for our talk. So I want to go back to way back many thousands of years ago to a guy named Samuel. Now Samuel, well, let's just read it and then I'll explain about Samuel. So now the Lord said to Samuel, "You have mourned long enough for Saul. I have rejected him as king of Israel, so fill your flask with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my king." But Samuel asked, "How can I do that? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." "Take a heifer with you," the Lord replied, "and say that you have come to make a sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you which of his sons to anoint for me." So Samuel did as the Lord instructed. Then he arrived at Bethlehem. The elders of the town, or when he arrived in Bethlehem, the elders of the town came trembling to meet him. "What's wrong?" they asked. "Do you come in peace?" "Yes," Samuel replied. "I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Purify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." Then Samuel performed the purification rite for Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice too. And when they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, "Surely this is the Lord's anointed." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him." The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So that's a key phrase right there, so keep that in mind. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse told his son Abinadab, to step forward and walk in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "This is not but Samuel said, 'This is not the one the Lord has chosen.' Next, Jesse summoned Shemaiah, but Samuel said, 'Neither is this the one the Lord has chosen.' In the same way, all 7 of Jesse's sons were presented to Samuel, but Samuel said to Jesse, 'The Lord has not chosen any of these.' Then Samuel asked, 'Are these all the sons you have?' 'There is still the youngest,' Jesse replied, 'but he's out in the fields watching the sheep and goats.' 'Send for him at once,' Samuel said. We won't sit down and eat until he arrives." So Jesse sent for him. He was dark and handsome with beautiful eyes, and the Lord said, "This is the one, anoint him." So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. Then Samuel returned to Ramah. So, the background to this story is that Saul had been chosen as king. Samuel had chosen him as well. And Samuel's job, among many others, was to appoint the king. So they didn't have a democracy like we have where we get to vote and choose our own leaders. They had appointed us, or God had appointed one particular person that would choose the leader. So Samuel had chosen Saul, and Saul had not worked out. He was actually doing a real bad job as a king. And so God instructs Samuel to choose somebody else as king. So Samuel's a bit worried about, how Saul's going to feel about this, and he figures Saul might even kill him if he finds out about it. So he does it in a little bit of a stealthy way. And he basically calls a party. And he invites Jesse and his sons and all the officials in that particular town to this party. And then, as you saw in the story, Eliab, which was Jesse's oldest son, comes in. And Samuel goes, "Whoa, now this is a specimen." And he thinks this has got to be the guy. And so he's ready to anoint him. Now you got to understand, in that culture, things were very hierarchical in families. So the dad was the head of the family, the mom submitted to the dad, and then the birth order of the children was also hierarchical. So the firstborn son, he was sort of the top dog among the kids, and he would inherit more than the other kids would as well when the father died. And so, and then it would go by rank, second-born, third-born, and so on and so forth. And so that is why Jesse presented his sons in their birth order. Eliab first, and then so on and so forth down the ranks. And when its firstborn was rejected, that was a bit of a shock to all of them, because typically they would see it as the firstborn was the most entitled to any kind of privileges if they were to be granted. And if not him, well, surely the secondborn. And if not him, so on and so forth. And so here they go through the whole 7 of them. And the youngest one is so far down on the pecking order that they didn't even think of bringing him to the party. He's out in the fields watching the sheep. And so they get there, and Samuel's like, "Is this every last son you have?" And they're like, "Well, no, there is one more." And it's one of those awkward cringe moments. And so he's like, "Send for him." And so David comes in there, and he stinks like crazy, and of course, is dirty and all of that. And then God says to Samuel, "Okay, here's the guy." So here we have a picture of Jesus. Jesus was constantly upsetting the pecking order. He was constantly lifting people up from the bottom of society and giving them dignity and honor. And this is what God does here. Now, God didn't do that always in the Old Covenant, the first part of the Bible, but in many places he did reflect Jesus' thinking, even in the Old Covenant. And this is one of those times. And so David is chosen as the new king. And And this is one of the places in which God reveals one of the key things about himself. And he tells Samuel, when Samuel's ready to anoint this oldest son to be king, he says, no. You're judging by outward appearances. God looks at the heart. And Jesus really embodied that truth when he came several thousand years later. Jesus really showed us what it means to look at the heart and not at the outward. And so when God told Samuel this, it was one of those key teaching moments that was true for the whole rest of history. And this is one of the key ways in which we understand the difference between religion and having a relationship with Jesus. Religion looks at the outward appearances. God, and Jesus in particular, the physical manifestation of God here on earth, looks at the heart. That is absolutely key. If you don't remember anything else from our talk this morning, remember that one thing. Religion is about appearances. Jesus is about the heart. That's key. Approach to goodness is almost invariably based on outward appearances. We're measuring behaviors. Is that good behavior or bad behavior? And that's what religions revolve around. Every single religion is actually somebody's list of rules and rituals. So they have designed what they feel is the line. Here are the rules and rituals that make you a good person, and if you step over on this side, you're a bad person. Every single religion on earth is based on that type of thinking. And every single religion on earth was designed by a person originally. Now, it might have been modified along the way, but every religion is ultimately based on somebody's opinion about what is good behavior and what is bad behavior. And so, now, we are Christians in the church here, and as Christians, we're followers of Jesus. So we are not technically religious, because we follow a relationship with him, not a set of rules. However, Brad Pitt grew up in church, and he still got the idea that it was about rules, do's and don'ts. The sad fact is, people have superimposed their religious ideas on the church down through church history. And you may have grown up in a church that had lots of rules, or maybe you know of somebody and that has turned you off or turned them off from being part of church. Because we have taken what God intended to be a beautiful relationship and we have humanized it by making it religious, making it about rules and rituals. And so we end up with this hybrid kind of approach where we still talk the talk of following Jesus, but we act religiously. And it turns people off of church like it did for Brad Pitt. And quite frankly, I don't blame people from being turned off of that kind of church experience. Because it's not what Jesus intended. It's actually what is the exact opposite of what Jesus intended. So how did this happen? Like, how can that happen when Jesus had such good intentions? And even before Jesus, God obviously didn't look at outward appearances. He looked at the heart. how on earth did we end up with churches that are so religious? How can that happen? Well, let me give you a theory. I'm not saying that this is all-encompassing and it always happens this way every time. But I believe this is one of the reasons, key reasons, why this can happen in churches. See, the Bible is made up of two parts. There's the old part and the new part. The old part is the first 2/3, and the new part is the last third. Now, the old part has actually lots of rules and rituals in it. It actually was designed as kind of a temporary thing for people to sort of get it out of their system. Like it was sort of a step in the right direction, but it was never intended to be the final solution. Now, you might ask me, well, if it's only a temporary thing, well, why on earth did we not just get rid of it when Jesus came and just keep the new part that's relevant to us? Well, the reason we don't do that, and this is a very good reason, is because there's many parts of the old part of the Bible that connect well with the new part and actually point towards it. And this passage that we just read, this concept of man looking at the outward but God looking at the heart, is a good example of that, where we see the New Testament or new part of the Bible connecting with the old part of the Bible very well. And so we want to have both parts to see those connections and see those patterns in God. But there was also parts of the old part of that were just intended to be kind of like God saying, okay, if you want rules and rituals, here's some, knock yourself out, see if it works for you. And so the Israelis, who the old part was given to, they worked as hard as they could to follow all of those rules and rituals, only to come up short over and over and over again, and eventually basically prove to themselves that they just couldn't do it. And so that kind of led the way, or paved the way, if you will, for Jesus to come and introduce the permanent solution. It's almost like God had to sort of let humans try it their own way first to sort of, get that out of their system and prove to themselves that they couldn't do it. And let's face it, we as humans are stubborn. We want to believe we can do this. We want to believe that we are good, that we're good enough on our own to prove that we're good enough. And so we keep trying and trying and trying. You probably know people like that today. I meet people all the time that say, well, I'm a good person. I'm sure I'll get into heaven. What's that? That's people believing that I surely am good enough. And so sometimes you have to sort of beat your head against a brick wall enough times to realize, oh my goodness, I just don't cut it here. And that's sort of what all those rules and rituals were about. And so once people sort of got the message, then God sent Jesus. And that all those rules and rituals were put to the side by Jesus. See, Jesus took a completely different approach. Jesus looked at the heart. And that's so interesting. See, Jesus too was asked this classic question many times. Is it okay to do this or that? And Jesus' answers were so frustrating to religious people. Let me give you an example. So there's this woman caught in adultery, and they bring her to Jesus and they say, okay, Jesus, what do you say? Is it okay to commit adultery or not? Now, you would think in a case like that, it would be pretty black and white. I mean, Jesus would just say, of course it's not right to commit adultery. I mean, that would be a very easy thing to answer. Do you think that's what Jesus did? No. He gets these religious people all flustered because he comes at it from a completely different approach. He just sort of quietly says, well, okay, if you think that this is such a bad thing, go ahead and punish her. The first person, or the person that has never done anything wrong, throws the first stone. Jesus, just tell us, is this right or wrong? No, I'm not going to say whether it's right or wrong. I am going to put the focus back on your hearts. And Jesus did this kind of thing over and over and over again. And the religious people, the most religious people of all, were so frustrated with Jesus that they finally killed him because he was just messing with everybody's mind. Like this line that they had made so nice and clear, black and white, Jesus was just messing that whole thing up over and over again because he was saying, I don't care about your line, I care about your heart. And this is the heart of God. This is the difference between religion and Jesus, and being a Jesus follower and being a religious person. It's a beautiful thing. See, Jesus went so far as to say the most important thing over and above every rule and ritual and all these things that you guys might want to come up with is love. If you learn to love, that's the superimposed, most important thing out of everything. You learn that and you are good to go. Well, love that's about the heart. We even symbolize love with a heart. That's the key thing. And that's what Jesus was all about. Now, religious people will claim to love God, and they probably do, many of them love God, but Jesus didn't leave it at loving God. He didn't say, well, you just love God and that's all that's important. He actually said, no, you need to love God, and just as important is loving your neighbor as yourself. And this is where religious people get hung up. A lot of religions actually justify hating certain groups of people in the name of loving God. And that is another one of the telltale signs that you've missed Jesus and the heart of God, and you are on a religious idea. And folks, this is the most tragic thing that can happen in a church. When we become hateful towards certain groups of people in the name of religious ideas, we have completely missed the heart of Jesus. Jesus called us to love people, not to justify hating people. And I think one of the reasons why Christians have gotten a bad name is because we've been so hateful in some cases. Hateful against certain groups of people. And Jesus would be absolutely dead set against that if he were walking on earth today. He would be absolutely saying, no way will I ever condone or justify talking hatefully, acting hatefully, or even harboring hate in your heart towards another person or another group of people, no matter what they are or who they are. He won't allow for that. That's not where Jesus goes. God will not allow us to hate people, period. He was absolutely furious with people who justified hatred or discrimination or abuse of any kind when he walked here on earth, and he's still like that. And this, I believe, is where we as the church have gone so wrong on many occasions, where we have justified, because of our religious thinking, abuse, discrimination, and hateful words and deeds in different situations. And when Christians become political in the sense that they are hateful towards certain groups of people, I think we have completely missed Jesus. There's no justification for that. See, Jesus came to wipe out all that kind of thinking. He actually came to wipe out religious thinking. So if you're not into organized religion, I've got good news for you. Jesus is your friend. He came to actually wipe out all of that kind of thinking. He's not into organized religion any more than you are. He's actually against it. And this is good news. Now, I know a lot of people who are kind of rough around the edges, but they have a good heart. And I, for many years, actually felt kind of smug because I championed this idea that, well, they're kind of this way or that way, but they have a good heart. But where I went wrong was that I believed what people said was a reflection of their heart every time. And I have learned the hard way over the years that you can't actually believe that what people say is always an accurate reflection of their motives. People can say a lot of things. They can talk the talk really well. And that does not give them a good heart. See, in order to know somebody's heart, you really need to know what their motives are. And to know somebody's motives is really hard. The truth is, we can hardly know our own motives most of the time, let alone know other people's motives. And so this is where God has a huge advantage over us, because he sees right into your heart and sees your motives. And that's what he's looking at. But you see, Jesus doesn't just look at your motives and go, oh boy. If that were the case, I would be scared of him. But Jesus actually takes it one step further, and he says, I see your motives, both good and bad, and not only do I see them, but I am actually willing to transform your motives that aren't so good. I'll work with you. And that's why he sent the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit actually reveals the truth about our motives to us, and then helps us to be transformed by the changing of our brains. Our thinking patterns change as Jesus rubs off on us, so that we become more like Jesus. And that, folks, is really good news. That is the good news of the gospel. That Jesus loves us exactly the way we are, with our good and bad motives, but he doesn't leave us the way we are. He actually will come and walk with us and change those motives from the inside out, so that we become genuinely motivated by good motives, not just trying to follow somebody's set of rules for outward behaviors. I would submit to you that is what the resurrection is all about. That's what the resurrection symbolizes. See, when Jesus died, he died to our sin, or because of our sin. But when he rose from the dead, he rose to a brand new life, a transformed life, paving the way for us to be able to lay our negative motives aside and rise to a new life of good motives in every area of our lives. Now, it takes time. It's not an instant magic wand kind of thing. It's a process, but that's the journey with Jesus that is so powerful. Your motives change over time into something absolutely beautiful. So today I'd like to end our service a little bit differently. Now, if you're sitting here today and you're not having Jesus in your life in that way, that he's affecting your motives and changing you and so on, today would be a great day to invite him in. And I'm going to actually invite the prayer team people to stand over here as we close our service today. And if you are in that position where you're going, yeah, I'd like to get to know Jesus. I'd like to have his influence in my life. I'd like to have him forgive my sins and transform my motives. Then why don't you slip over there and they will walk you through a process of inviting him in. For the rest of us that are already on this journey, whether we've started this journey or not, or started this journey just recently, or we are further down the road, I'd like to celebrate this morning. I'd like us to celebrate the fact that we are not stuck in a religious system. We are in a transformational love relationship. And the resurrection has changed everything for us. So I'm actually going to show a music video to end my talk today. And this music video talks about rising out of the grave. And it's got a double meaning. It's the one meaning is about when Jesus comes to take us home to heaven. And another meaning is about how Jesus already took us out of religious thinking and into freedom, the freedom of love. So, how many of you have heard of Ricky Skaggs? Yeah, Ricky Skaggs is a country music singer. So this song is sung by his daughter, Molly Skaggs, and it's called Aint No Grave. Now, as we play this, I want you all to stand up, and I want you to clap your hands, and I want you to high five at least 5 people, because we're celebrating, okay? Like, don't do the funeral thing, oh, sorry for your loss, and kind of sulk your way out. We are happy about this, right? Okay, let's roll it. Stand up, everybody.
Oh, shame is a prison, as cruel as a grave. Shame is a robber, and he's come to take my name.
Yeah!
Love is my redeemer, lifting me up from the ground. Love is the power where my freedom song is found. Let's sing that. Shame is a prison. Come on. It's cruel as a grave. Shame is a robber, and he's come to take my name. Oh, love is my redeemer.
High five.
Lifting me up from the ground. Love is the power where my freedom song is found. There ain't no grave
Yeah!
gonna hold my body down.
walk into.
If you walk down
The grave I'm walking to.
if you
Walk down the grave I'm walking to.
if you
Walk down the grave I'm walking to.
always sing about it.
If you walk down that grave I'm walking to. If you walk down that grave I'm walking to. If you walk down that grave I'm walking to. If you walk down the grave I'm walking to. If you walk down the grave I'm walking to. If you walk down that grave I'm walking to. Hold my body down. Yeah! Well, the formal part of our service is over. Calm down. Don't get crazy now, but let's celebrate God's freedom. Happy Thanksgiving to you.